Adelaide. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Wentworth.
Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak briefly on the Excise Tariff Amendment, Draught Beer Bill 2025. While I support the bill in its efforts to provide some temporary relief to parts of Australia's hospitality sector who are really struggling, namely pubs and clubs, I want to echo many of the concerns expressed by some of my crossbench colleagues, speak briefly on another area of excise regime and comment on a proposed ATO determination currently under consideration. Deputy Speaker, my electorate of Wentworth is home to some amazing local institutions, from the Bondi Bowlo, the Diggers to the Paddington RSL. These are just some of the community-operated bars and clubs and restaurants that give so much to the culture, atmosphere and events of the eastern suburbs. But these establishments and the rest in the eastern suburbs have navigated a challenging business environment over the past few years. COVID hit these sorts of organisations really hard, but with a long tail of the cost of living crisis, has dried up consumer demand in what should have been their recovery phase and has made it harder to keep their doors open. Across Australia, hospitality venues are falling at a faster rate than almost any other sector in the economy, beaten only by construction. In 2023-24, we lost 1,667 such businesses across Australia. This bill offers some welcome reprieve. This bill amends the Excise Tariff Act and the Customs Tariff Act to pause indexation of the excise and customs duties rates on draft beer poured from taps, for 2 years. Deputy Speaker, Wentworth also hosts some amazing craft breweries, including Bondi Brewers and Curly Lewis, as well as Australia's leading independent seltzer company, Vela. These independent brewers also add so much to my local community, creating new venues and product, and a taste of the eastern suburbs consumed all over Australia. These institutions face considerable challenges of their own. Not only is indexation pushing up the price of their products twice a year, but they face an incredibly concentrated market dominated by two large multinational companies. After you take out foreign-owned businesses and home-branded products, the Independent Brewers Association reports that some 670-odd independent brewers are left to compete for around 7% of the remaining market share. Last year, as part of the Economics Committee, I investigated the beer market as part of the Better Competition and Better Prices report. We heard that the beer market has become pay-to-play, where the large companies can undercut local competitors through promotional marketing, discounts and even tap contracts that mean independents might either have no taps in a pub or a club or jostle amongst each other for a single tap. This makes it hard for independent brewers to get their brands out into the public consumption outside of their own premises. They often rely on the sale of bottled or canned beer sold in traditional liquor stores or in their own storefronts. For brewers with this business model, this excise will provide very limited relief. While I acknowledge the announcement by the government to lift the remission cap from $350,000 to $400,000 for July 1 next year, I will also be supporting the member for Bradfield's amendment to increase the scope of the excise to include local independent craft beer sold in bottles and cans. Local independent brewers face another potential challenge in the coming months because of a recently announced draft guidance known as ED 2024/D2. Based on the draft determination, the ATO appears to be moving away from an objective determination of what constitutes beer to favour a more subjective one. Instead of determining beer based on its fermentation process, it appears the ATO will look at the final product to see if it fits within a conventional understanding of beer. This has potentially significant consequences for beverage producers whose product is no longer considered to fit within the conventional understanding of beer, now or in the future. These products would be subject to a new excise rate of $105.98 per litre of alcohol, compared to beer, which attracts an excise rate of $62.56, pointing them at a significant cost disadvantage to beer. With the nature of beer evolving to different preferences and tastes to include a broader palette, including sour beers and even seltzers, I question, is it really the role of the ATO to determine what is and isn't a beer now, based on how beer is conventionally understood? Aren't other people concerned about this in this chamber? And I make light of it, but I'm sincere. I do wonder if this is the role of the ATO to determine what is a beer and what isn't a beer. It does seem to be some sort of overreach from the Taxation Office. Well, I have been reassured and received assurances that this will not be targeting craft brewers exploring different types of sour beers, for example. I'm concerned about the ambiguity of a determination in a market that is reliant on innovation to challenge the status quo. As I've already mentioned, Australia's beer market is already dominated by an offshore duopoly that holds more than 80% of the Australian beer market. I'm concerned that by imposing further restrictive definitions on beer based on convention serves to protect existing products and will limit the ability for new local brewers to compete with established brands on the basis of the innovation in the product market, which they have done to date. I understand that draft determination ED 2420D2 is due to be finalised by the end of 2025, but no longer consulting with stakeholders. But I urge the Assistant Treasurer to consider advising the ATO to revise ED 2024D2 in favour of rules that are clear, well-designed and easy to follow. This is important for businesses to be able to continue to innovate and invest, confident in that they know how their product will ultimately be classified. And finally, Deputy Speaker, returning to the issue of excise, I'd like to use this opportunity to draw the Parliament's attention to another issue we have in Australia's excise regime, illegal tobacco. This is a social problem that is hiding in plain sight. After successfully slashing the proportion of Australians smoking daily from 25% in 1991 to 8% in 2023, tobacconists are now popping up like mushrooms across our community, selling illegal tobacco and vapes, capitalising on cheap illegal tobacco. There are now around 20,000 tobacconists in Australia, about 60 tobacconists for every McDonald's. The term, "Do you have the cheap ones?" becoming a thinly veiled code named for illicit cigarettes, costing about one-third the price of legal cigarettes. There is a perfectly sound reason for having a tobacco excise tax. As my economics lecturer 101 would tell me, we want price externalities and discourage harmful behaviours. And for the most part, our tobacco policy has served public health and public finance well. But we've hit an inflection point. The growing disparity between the price of legal and illegal cigarettes has created a lucrative and largely unenforced black market, proving counterproductive to both health and the budget, not to mention the impact it is having on driving organised crime. The consumption of legal tobacco apparently fell 22% last year. 22%. That is frankly unbelievable and is in contradiction to wastewater testing. What that shows is the consumption of legal tobacco fell 22%, but with wastewater indicating that this is just moving straight out of the legal tobacco and into illegal tobacco, which means that we are missing now around potentially up to a fifth of our tobacco excise, and we are fuelling through this sort of change the organised crime that is facilitating this trade in illegal tobacco. Consequently, cigarette excise is in freefall, with economist Chris Richardson estimating untaxed illegal cigarettes are costing the budget around $10 billion. Organised crime has grabbed the opportunity presented by illegal tobacco, lending to a surge in arson attacks and violence for the control of a growing and highly lucrative market. Across Australia, we've had more than 200 attacks since 2023. But the police tell me that they are simply not resourced to deal with this growing threat. I acknowledge that the government has already made some contributions to the issue, including contributions both this year and last year to step up funding for the Federal Police and the Australian Border Force. But the government is losing the war on this, and much more needs to be done. At the very minimum, I think the government needs to have an urgent parliamentary inquiry into what is needed to actually solve this issue. And I think we should think about this having three priorities for excise policy. There has to be public health, collecting revenue, but also minimising criminal activity associated. At this stage, the current tobacco excise is failing at least two of these measures. It needs to be reviewed, and the question of how we actually manage this, and what has actually now has really turned into an enormous problem, which is going to be quite hard to reverse, extremely difficult and complicated to reverse. This is where I think this growth in excise has led us. what we are holding, this is, and again, I will draw the government's attention to this in particular. They should be taking urgent action on this issue, and have really, frankly, have not gone anywhere near enough. Thank you so much.